Welcome to the presentation of the Portuguese edition of the bestseller Startup Nation by Dan Sinwar and Soul Singer, a book that shows what the world can learn from Israel's meteoric economic success. I would like to invite to the stage Professor João Tasságua, rector of Nova, to give the welcome speech.
Good afternoon and welcome to the warm-up event of Nova Innovation Day, which will happen tomorrow. But this event is very important for itself. So please let me address, first of all, my best regards to State Secretary for Digital Transition, André Dragão Azevedo, whose presence here is a great honor for our university. To His Excellency the Israeli Ambassador to Portugal, Rafael Gamzu, who is a good friend of Nova University, and I'm also proud to say that I consider him a very good friend of mine. The President of the Commission for the Coordination and Regional Development of Lisbon and Tagus Valley, Teresa Almeida, who leads perhaps the most important program for the future development of this region. And the Deputy Mayor of Almada, João Covaneiro, a rising city full of potential for development opportunities, and the home of Nova's largest school, the Nova School of Science and Technology. I would like also to give a warm welcome to all the participants in today's roundtable. First of all, Soul Singer, of course, a distinguished journalist, economic policy expert, and co-author of the book Startup Nation, which is the centerpiece of this debate. Jorge Portugal, General Manager of Cotec, Nuno Arantes Oliveira, Professor of Nova SBE, Entrepreneur and Investor, and António Navais Carvalho, Coordinator of Nova SBE Haddad Entrepreneurship Institute, who will be moderating the debate. Thank you all for being here. We definitely look forward to hearing what you have to say. Finally, I would like to give a special welcome to all distinguishable guests in the audience and to all of those watching us at Nova YouTube channel. The book Startup Nation is a must-read on Israel's economic growth, often referred to as economic miracle. A miracle particularly when considering the fact that this 70-year-old nation, with a population of little over 9 million, very few natural resources, and constantly facing many challenges at the political and peace levels, has managed to become a worldwide example of entrepreneurial spirit and technological achievement. The success of Israel's high-tech sector is remarkable and a lesson to us all on the benefits of promoting entrepreneurship, which is something that Nova University is particularly committed to over the next decade, and also a good example of the key role that universities can have in their nation's development. By fostering a collaborative environment with social and economic partners, universities can support the approach to complex issues and develop innovative solutions to address real problems in society. And they are the natural places to do that, as they combine a permanent search for knowledge with an institutional appetite for risk-taking. Unlike companies, and perhaps like startups, in which bad decisions results in economic loss, universities and startups, the fail is an integral part of their activity. Not only long ago, we had the pleasure of having Professor Peretz Lavi with us at Nova University, former president of University of Technion, for a few months as an advisor of Nova, giving all this experience of leadership at one of the most, if not the single most prestigious university in the Middle East. And Technion was precisely one of the key drivers of universities' rise as a technological power and a startup nation. Without further delay, I will now invite you to listen to the author of the book himself, Mr. Soul Singer. I wish you all a pleasant afternoon and hope you enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Ecosystems around the world. And now everywhere is doing startups. Certainly, of course, in China and India, and certainly throughout Europe, around the world. I noticed that Portugal now has 4 unicorns, and I'm sure that this is a development of just the last couple of years. Um, this is taking off everywhere. It's taking off in Portugal. Just ask yourselves, where were you 2 years ago, and where are you today? And you could ask that question in every country, and the answer is that a lot has happened, and that trend is going to continue, and that's really exciting because I believe that it's much easier for ecosystems to grow today than it was when there were only a handful in the world, because and this is I hope a big takeaway from my talk is that it's critical for any ecosystem that wants to grow to connect with other ecosystems. And there's research behind this. There's one of the startup rankings organizations, one of their criteria for ranking countries on their startup ecosystem is how connected are they to other countries? Because think about it. If you have country A that is trying to build its ecosystem on its own, and country B that is trying to turn itself into a hub which connects to startup ecosystems in the region and to big ones like Silicon Valley and like Israel that really works at making these connections. Startup ecosystem B, country B, is going to grow faster. It's very clear. And this is one of the biggest things that everyone overlooks in trying to build their ecosystem. So I think what's very important. So how do you build ties between ecosystems? It's actually shockingly obvious and easy, but no one does it. And that is for people to meet each other, whether on Zoom, but hopefully in person, to meet each other. In other words, let's say that Israeli entrepreneur wants to work in Portugal, wants to do something in Portugal. They don't know who to call. They don't know anybody there. They don't know how Portugal works. They don't know the culture. Same with someone in Portugal wants to work with Israel. Who do you know in Israel? I mean, there's not a connection, not enough of a connection now. Basically, if you look at, say, Israel and Silicon Valley, there's kind of a highway of connection. Israelis know who to call there. They knew who to call in Israel. There's a lot of familiarity and working together now over decades. And this has to be built up starting now between Portugal and not just Israel, but other countries. And the way to do that is simply for the entrepreneurs to meet each other. So what I talk about is rather than just a trade mission. This is way, historically what governments do is they do trade missions. The president takes a bunch of CEOs to the other country and they meet the big CEOs in the other country. That's a trade mission. We need innovation missions, meaning the same thing, but on the level of entrepreneurs. And larger companies. I mean, also your big companies. We've got something like 400 multinational R&D centers here, and there are new ones all the time. So the big companies really find it very useful to engage with Israeli innovation, and that is also good for Portuguese companies, and will also, I think, increase the connections with Portugal. And we're so close. So, it's we're much closer than Silicon Valley, and There's even great cheap flights between Lisbon and Tel Aviv. So highly recommended. And another reason actually is if you're an entrepreneur, it's a lonely thing to be. Wherever you are unusual. You are an unusual person. You're different than the people around you. You're more like entrepreneurs in other countries than you are like people in your own country in some ways. So if you come to Israel, you'll simply get a huge dose of encouragement because you'll be in a place where a lot of people, where every coffee shop is full of people with their laptops open doing startups, thinking about their next one. So to be in an environment like that is very powerful. Which is actually why I was excited to see that you have a startup visa in Portugal. I understand since 2017. And that's a great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Trying to get startups to come to Portugal, encouraging that, making it easy for them, but not just startups, but also tech sector talent to come to Portugal. And frankly, I wish that Israel did that more. We don't make it easy enough for people to come to Israel. We rely too much on our own talent, and we're actually running short of it. The biggest uh, uh, the biggest problem with that our system has is a shortage of tech talent. We just don't have enough people here, and I'm hoping that we open the doors more the way Silicon Valley is open, New York is open, London is open, Lisbon is open. Everyone's happy to have people from other countries come and work, and we don't take advantage of this enough. I hope that will change in the future. So I really look forward to saying more in the panel, getting into other topics. There's a lot more to talk about, but for now, thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Please stay with us for the debate, for which I now invite to the stage Jorge Portugal, General Manager of Cotec, Nuno Arantes Oliveira, entrepreneur, investor and professor of Nova SPE, and our moderator, António Novaes de Carvalho, coordinator of Nova SPE Haddad Entrepreneurship Institute. The floor is yours.
See if it's working. Yeah, it is. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, Nova University, and thanks also for both of my panel members to be here alongside me. So let me begin by saying that just like Israel, the Portuguese ecosystem began in moments of adversity and needed to be overcome. If I remember correctly, the first significant group of startups being launched in the country back in 2009, 2000, times where we had the IMF bailout. Also, unemployment rate was going sky high at the moment, so people in the end needed to find alternatives for getting money, getting income, and self-employment was one of the options, and that's one of the reasons why we started launching startups at that time. Also, Israel, it began way earlier, so I believe, just like Saul said, in the beginning of the 90s. Also, in circumstances of adversity and obstacles as well. So the country has been attacked at least seven in the previous 60 years. Also, it was the target of international sanctions for several times during the previous decade. Even agriculture, that was a base of subsistence of the country. The soils were quite unfertile, so in the end, innovation also came from the necessity of the country to become self-sustainable and also to produce enough goods for the population. So there are quite some similarities in terms of how the ecosystems began. Although naturally, when you look at Israel, even within, I would say, 20 years ahead in terms of development of the ecosystem, the level they reach is yet not comparable to Portugal, even if corrected by 20 years, I would say. And for that reason, and Saul already gave us a few hints of some key takeaways that incorporate in our decisions in order to grow faster. He just mentioned is to increase the connectivity between ecosystems. But the first question goes to Saul, and I think it's quite obvious. If you could more takeaways besides this one, especially when he looks at Portugal and the knowledge that's there, how does he see us becoming one of the top 3 or top 5 ecosystems in the world, just like in 10 years? Learnings can he pass to us in order for us to achieve that?
I think I understood the question, but there was a problem with the microphone, so I didn't really hear it. Yeah, go ahead.
They are similar in size when compared to Israel in terms of population. Some more insights that we can gain from your side in order to grow faster and reach the level of Israel in a couple of decades.
So the first thing I would say may sound a little strange, but I think it's to understand that every country builds its own ecosystem based on its own culture, its own history, and its own strengths. And those strengths come out of your culture, your history, your circumstances in the world, your size. By the way, as I think you know, we small countries have some advantages. One is that we can't rely on our local market. We must, from day one, kind of be global. So large countries have a lot of trouble imagining or going for something global. Of course, the U.S. is kind of an exception here, but you know, if you're India or China, it's very hard to conceive of going outside of your local market. In Portugal, you're automatically thinking that, and that's true of small countries. Another advantage of small countries is kind of the networking advantage, particularly in Israel, where there's very little hierarchy, very informal culture. It's very easy to get to anyone in, you know, 1 or 2 phone calls, and I think that's another factor in small countries, that universities, scientists, and entrepreneurs and big companies can work together perhaps more easily. But so what I want to say is that Startup Nation is Israel's innovation story. And every country has a different innovation story based on its own culture and history and so on. And you can see this because look at the differences between the United States. Israel is a small country with no resources in a pretty bad neighborhood. And the United States is a huge country with lots of resources in a good neighborhood. And the United States built Silicon Valley, and we became Startup Nation. With, you know, the cultures nothing to do with each other, the circumstances nothing to do with each other. So that shows that every country has to build on its differences. And the beauty is in combining our strengths. So when you work with, why does combining, working with other ecosystems, why is it so important? First of all, because, you know, you're not trying to do everything yourself. But the real big thing is that since every culture has a different strength, when you let's say you co-found startups with founders from different countries, you're combining different strengths. Um, and think about it, that's how a startup team is. Now, if anyone here is an investor, you know that you don't invest in the idea, you invest in the team because you know the idea is going to change along the way. The question is, do you have a team that can make it work? And the idea may be changed 10 times before it's a success. So what is a great team? A great team is people who are different from each other. Not There's no one person who's good at everything. You can't be good at sales and technology and management and marketing and all the things that startups have to do. There's no one person who can do that. You need to build a team of people who are very different, have different strengths, and yet are compatible, which is not so easy. So what I'm saying is that what you're doing is you're combining different strengths in the team. What I'm saying is if you work together with countries, you're combining different strengths of different countries.
Early 90s, I believe, since 93. So my question is, when you look at some indicators in the country, like the overall investment in R&D, also the measures of the government to promote the culture of entrepreneurship in the country, and also in terms of access to talent, do you believe we are in the right track to become a more relevant player international in the startup ecosystem scene, or something is lacking? How do you see it or foresee it for the upcoming 10 years?
Thank you so much. Just to congratulate, first of all, Universidade Nova. It's my university. I've been studying here for a long time ago, but it's always good to come back to the school and to learn something. And also to greet Ambassador Rafael Gamso, because he and his predecessor have been changing the relationship of Portugal with Israel. And so much has happened during the last almost 8 years, 9 years, and a lot of connections, as Solsinga have mentioned. A lot of connections have been established, and much of that, and I believe that that's the role of a diplomat. It's to connect countries and connect for the good of each country. Countries, everyone said that countries don't have friends, have interests. But here, we, more than interests, we have been building a institutional relationship and a personal relationship. So thank you so much. And these relationships have been allowing us to, and myself personally, to gain a direct experience of what was really about the miracle of Israel. And when I read this book the first time was back immediately just after it was launched back to 2009, 2010, and I was in other function, other service, other functions in the government, and I was wondering, how can we replicate the miracle? Because miracles, we don't know how they happen. So we accept them and accept that they are supernatural, but we don't know how how they happen. So they don't require explanation. It's only the manifestation of something extraordinary. Mm-hmm. But here, I believe, and with my trips, and I've been in Israel several times with different for missions, for innovation missions, as for exploration and learning. I believe that the path that Israel has been evolving and developing in the last, say, 20 years, 25 years, back to 1991, Israel was in a crisis that was very similar to Portugal back 10 years ago. So what happened is a profound and structural intervention in society. And we in Portugal, and I'm going back to the question just in a minute, what we are just mimicking, or at least our path, it's similar. Some results are really happening. Back in 10 years ago, we were wondering, oh, we would like to have an unicorn. Where are the unicorns? So Portugal would never have an unicorn. And 10 years after a number of government interventions, consistent policies, a lot of support, we have been building the ecosystem. I recall that the first accelerator in Portugal, international accelerator for startups, was held in 2008 and 2009, better I. So things are evolving, things take time, and Israel, I think one of the key learnings from Israel is that the Israel path is very consistent, and I would say, and I can give back, we are learning and we are following some of that consistency. First, in education, and it was one of my impressive lessons. Everything starts in early school. I visit in the major education network in Israel, ORT. Its position is as a technology education network. So, which means that the flexibility time, so the free time, it's not imposed by the Ministry of Education as we have here. It's dedicated to technology matters, and that is one. And you can the key message is that each and everyone young that is going through the education path, education process, is prepared to be a citizen and to be an entrepreneur. Everything you learn at school, every experience you have at the school, it's to you become with a strong autonomy, maximum responsibility, maximum autonomy, and a wish to do things. The second thing, I think Saul, and in the book as well, mentioned, it's the army. It's the experience. And it's not, many people say, oh, it's the army because it's the dual innovation system. So many things, technologies are developed in the army, are moved to the civil sector. It's, from my point of view, we don't have a stronger army like that, so early user, but it's not the real experience. The real experience is what I experienced to see girls and boys, 70 years old, with machine gun, just traveling the train. And so they are incorporated in the army. But the point is, it's a 3 years full experience of life. So you have to go, as Saul said, you go through a very incredible grow-up experience. When you go to university, you just grew up a lot. So, and you go to university and go to civil life with a strong asset, that is your army network. And the third thing, and I think that it was mentioned already, the third thing, as in Portugal, it's a little bit more difficult because we are a little bit a formal society. It's the informality. So when I go to Israel, it's a very civilized, organized, free thing. You find in Tel Aviv and Haifa and other cities, you find everything you find in Europe. But I have a friend that says, okay, George, don't forget that we are Middle East guys. So first time I went to a conference in Tel Aviv, was for cybersecurity, and I was the only guy with a tie. So everyone, it was really a tie on the tie and on the suit. So, and I just get, it's no mention that I got noticed. So it's very informal. It's not only formal in the way people in Israel dress. Israel and abroad. It's informal in the way they address the networking thinking. So if they know someone that can help, they go for it. And this is learned, is something that is learned in the early stage of their civil life, and it's propagated and it's applied across the whole life cycle. I have been called for many times for Israeli friends that say, okay, I need someone that, and they don't be shy. They are not shy to ask for help because they know, they understand that if I help you in one moment, someone will help me in another time. So it's basically, this is a basic principle of networking thinking. So it was a long way, and I will finish in a minute. I think Portugal has a lot of similarities with Israel. It's in education. We are doing a terrific job in the last 20, 30, 25 years in the scientific system, in entrepreneurial, in ecosystem. We are moving knowledge. When I went to school, I went to a university. It was on a few people that was attending university. Now we are just close to the average European. And we see every day that the problem is not to generate knowledge, and we are in a knowledge generating space. So the problem is that companies can apply and can use that knowledge and can use it fast. So we are producing knowledge, we are producing the best talent and best well-trained people from the scratch, and we are start to learning as a society to be a little bit more open, a bit more cooperative. There's one, there is a, you can say there's a long way already done, but you can do much better. In Portugal, just 1 out of 5 companies cooperate with other companies. So we are a little bit close. We think most people think that, oh, it's good to be alone because nobody steals my secrets and nobody steals my ideas. But the culture in Israel, as it is in Silicon Valley, it's you cannot keep a secret. You cannot keep an idea. The only way, as so I said, when idea is born, it's like the newborn. Only the parents love them because everyone thinks they are ugly. So an idea should be nurturing, should be shared, and very fast in order that to be scale up. And Israel is a startup nation. It's also now a scale-up nation because they are able to start up and to build something. So I think that we, from all the indicators, all the involving paths in the last 20 years that I think that we are in a good path. So I would be happy if we consider a little bit more sense of urgency. We are a little bit, we are moving, but we have to move. The world is moving very, very fast. And we have to move fast as well.
Thank you, George. I'm going to switch now to Nuno. On the topic of access to capital. It was mentioned in the book, although my question is not related directly to the book, but one of the chapters, I think, was the chapter 3. It mentioned the YOSMA project in Israel, which is basically governmental funding of the startup ecosystem. Back in the 90s, we had something quite similar in the country, or you tried to do something similar with the creation of Portugal Ventures back in 2010. Then we also had it on top, the 200M matching fund. So already steps we already managed to overcome in order to increase the access of funding for our startups. But in the end, and although we already have 4 or 5 unicorns, just like Saul said, like OutSystems, FitZai, Define Crowded, but in the end, we still, in my opinion, we lack Series B and Series C funding funds in the country, and we didn't have any significant exit yet. So we have large companies, but no exit. I mean, the way you look at the funding in Portugal, do you think it's something is missing, or we are also in the right path, but we just need to be patient because we'll be getting there and we'll have a significant exit and we'll manage to basically get funding internationally with time if things keep going in this direction.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Very nice to be here. Well, you only know if you're in the right path when you get to the destination. And I don't know if we know what the destination here. So I don't know if is here. So I don't know if we'll ever know if whether we're on the right path. Let me take a regression here before answering your question directly to say, hearing about the book and this discussion, I have to say that in case it is not clear to everybody, I think the first thing we should do is avoid imitating. And this actually picks up on something that Sol said to your question, and I'm glad he said it. Each story is different. Each path to whatever we want to reach, an entrepreneurial community or having many unicorns or whatever, will be a different path because each country is very different. And the conclusions of this book about why Israel is Startup Nation really have to make us think that, right? The conclusion is that a big factor is the fact that Israel is a country of immigrants. Well, we are exactly the opposite historically. We are the country of people that stayed. We stayed when the cream of society went to fight in Northern Africa. We stayed when the Jews were expelled. We stayed when the Jesuits were expelled. We stayed when, in the mid-20th century, the real entrepreneurs went to France and Luxembourg and Switzerland and Venezuela and so forth. We are the country of those who stayed. Should that mean that we cannot achieve the success of Israel? No, of course not. But it does mean that we should not be imitating or comparing. And I emphasize this because not only in Portugal, but in many countries in the same situation, there's a natural tendency to try to be the next something, to try to be Silicon Valley. I happen to have lived in Silicon Valley several years. I do not think we should imitate Silicon Valley. I think, as was said, that we should think of our history, our culture, our present, and we should define what our strengths and weaknesses are. And based on that, and of course, learning from the examples, and especially learning from the failed examples, not just the success stories of countries, we should define our own path and avoid trying to be like somebody else. One of the obvious things that we need to do, and this again is very general, but I'll try to get more specific later, is simply remove the barriers. We have a few success stories. We have a few people who have made it. We have a few exits, not many, but we do have a few significant exits, not necessarily in the newspapers. And what we should probably do is look at those success stories or half success or even non-success and look at what barriers there are in the country that those entrepreneurs, those companies, those people are facing and lift them. You mentioned 200M. 200M is a fund that is, the idea is kind of a no-brainer. It creates an obvious advantage for investors, private investors, to invest in Portuguese startups. But I would say there aren't as many companies as we would wish getting to the point of, even with those advantages, those investors wanting to invest in Portugal, and that is because there are barriers. It's not because there's a lack of will or a lack of good ideas at the government level, at the entrepreneurs, universities, and so forth. There are barriers. There's red tape. There's something that relates to something George said. You mentioned this formality. I would say the problem of formality is that it's a surrogate for hierarchy and hierarchical thinking and hierarchical decision making, which stands in the way. And I could give you practical examples, specific examples. That's a cultural, but also a sort of specific practical, visible barrier that needs to be lifted at many levels, not only funding, but many other levels. You asked about access to capital. Yes, of course, there's a lot to be done. There's always a lot to be done. That's good. We shouldn't think of there being a lot to be done as, oh, we're behind. No, of course, there's always a lot to be done. And the more problems we solve, the more problems there will be, and that's part of the path. So we now, relative to 5, 10, but even 5 years ago, we have funds that have the capacity to invest in Series B, maybe Series C, depending on the sector, both public funds and private funds. So it's, I would say access to capital has very strongly improved in Portugal. But of course, we started a little later than other countries. If we have now maybe, let's say, 4, 5, 6 funds of 70, 80 million magnitude, so they can invest in 5 million per round. Now, we didn't have any 5 years ago. Hopefully we'll have 10 or 20 in a few years, and let's work towards that. But it's, for me, mostly a matter of lifting barriers to people creating funds, to people growing companies, to people interacting with universities, more than having new ideas. I think there's been a lot of progress, a lot of good ideas on the table and being put in practice. Portugal Ventures essentially is one of them. 200M is another, but there are many others also at the level of civil society, incubators, and those kinds of initiatives. What we need to do is look at how those are working, what is failing, and lifting the barriers. That's sort of a general response, but I think that's essentially the crux of the matter.
I'm going to switch back now to Saul. Let's just double check if he's still online. In the chapter 2 of the book, which I think the title translated to English, because I read the book in Portuguese recently, but was something like planting the seed for a culture of innovation. In the end, what's your opinion about this role of universities in innovation ecosystems?
So it's not a coincidence that the coffee shops with the laptops open are often right near the universities. And in fact, this is an important lesson because startups don't really like tech parks. They like to be in the coolest part of town, with the most life, where the creatives are. That's where you'll find. That's where the people doing startups want to be, and often that's next to a university. Now there's a global problem with the translating the language of academia to the language of entrepreneurship. Uh, in universities everywhere, there are tremendous technologies and ideas that are waiting for entrepreneurs to take them and run with them. And bridging that gap is very difficult. But absolutely, there's that potential there. And a lot of countries I talk to, they point to the universities, what's going on in them as a strength, and they're right. But again, the hard part is the translation part. Is how do you connect these two cultures, these two languages, and that's called tech transfer. And that is one thing that can be copied to some extent. You can look at best practices in tech transfer offices and try to do that. I strongly agree with the comment just now before that lifting obstacles is often one of the most important things that government and universities can do for startups and entrepreneurship. Simply to ask the entrepreneurs, how are we making your life miserable? What can we stop doing that we're doing? So most governments and so on try to think, well, what can we do? It's often more important to think, what can we stop doing? Very important.
I will ask the same question to George, because I think it's quite relevant. How do you see the role of universities in the innovation ecosystem?
Well, universities, they have 3 missions. The first is to create knowledge, the second is to teach, and the third is to influence society and businesses with the knowledge that is created. As has been said, it's not the technology transfer, the knowledge transfer process it's something everything but simple process. it is very complex. That requires interaction, requires trust between the parties, requires understanding of what are the problems that have to be solved in terms of practical and economical value. And that interaction between university and the society and the economy is really a very complex system. I think much literature that has been studied, the technology transfer process has been quite rather simplifying the process. And what we see in the market, in the real life, that the good examples are those that are first, they stand for a long term. It's not the relationship between universities and businesses is not one night stand. It's a marriage for the good or for the worse. So it requires trust, it requires mutual knowledge, it requires to understand that the universities, they have a different cycle time in terms of producing the knowledge that can be applied and the technology problems can be solved. And I mean, of course, and in terms of the market, there is a part of the problem of the innovation cycle that it's not about universities. It's about scaling up and creating conditions for the product of the new technology be accepted by the market. And it's about marketing. It's about pricing. It's about this go-to-market strategies. So, and that's what is the kind of the problem that Portugal, I think it's all in innovation process around the world, but in Portugal we are trying to solve. We have here Deputy Minister for Economy, for Digital Transition, and we have been working in that problem in trying to not only to produce knowledge and to solve problems, technology problems that can be, and most companies are already working with universities to solve technology problems, but also to translate those problems in terms of products or services or platforms or solutions that can be accepted successful by the market. And so it's another competence. And in the book there is one chapter dedicated to the chief technology, the scientist office, and the matching funds. And these market tests that was, okay, the government sponsors and funds technologies and opportunities, but the market, they have to take the cotton test, as we say in Portugal. They have to, so the market should also match that funding. It's not, otherwise it will be science projects. And that has been, I think, something that in Portugal we have been learning across time, and the cooperation that we have with the government and in particular COTEC as an innovation network, and with companies that range from very, very small companies until large utilities. It's something that we have been learning to work in cooperation with the government. And we believe that, and Israel is a good example of, it's not possible that the private sector, universities, and policy decision makers to work independently. They have to cooperate as well, and they have to be agile. This doesn't mean that we don't keep our position decision as businesses, as universities, or as policy decision makers. But the problem is the most successful countries, Israel included, are those that have a very good platform, cooperation between these different realities, and they can move and they can solve. And that's what have been our experience in the last, say, 5 years. And now we have been across different governments, different decision makers, and we have been able to continue our cooperation and to keep the consistency and the speed. And also, this is also important for the businesses, because it's a very good, and we talk about Industry 4.0 program, and now the transition program, but we can speak about Startup Portugal and Portugal Ventures. So those are instruments of policy that are direct to solve market failures and to speed up processes that otherwise would take a long time. So I believe that cooperation between universities and businesses have been improving a lot in the last 20 years. I remember when I was back to the university and as a researcher, working with companies was something less noble regarding the researcher. Now it's something that is start to become as a premium in the and even you are one of probably on one of your curriculum bio products is your experience as entrepreneur as and dealing with the market. So it's not up to transform scientists in entrepreneurs, but what we see in university and I experienced, for instance, in cybersecurity ecosystem in Israel, it's something unbelievable. You go to an university space, and you see a tent of dozens of startups. You see a lot of companies already there in their space, so selling services, attracting talent, connecting with business partners, and discussing new opportunities and new features of new projects with researchers. So they mingle all the time. It's not necessary to create a session, a formal session, in order for people just to meet and greet and to discuss. No, it's a natural process, and I think that's really what is we have to do better in order to create more agility and speed, because it's the modern world innovation. It's all about speed and agility.
Just gonna switch to Noon on the same subject, because we need to finish. We don't have much time, but basically the question is the same, but also
universities.
Yeah,
look,
taking the example of Nova School of Business and Economics as well.
Yeah, well, I'm relatively new at SBE, but I think it's a good example in many ways. It's very international, very open. But let me look. I don't have the numbers, but I believe that Portugal is actually a very entrepreneurial country. If you count the number of people who start companies, we are obviously a country of small companies, and probably many of those are startups. The problem, it's not a problem, but from our point of view here, the problem is that most of these startups are restaurants, are bookshops, are rental agencies, and so forth. The issue is how to translate that entrepreneurial spirit into, let's say, university professors, if we want to. Because by default, we're talking about entrepreneurship of that sort, of people who start companies based on science or research. That's only one type of entrepreneurship, but it's obviously very important. It's where the groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting products and services come about. So how do we make that shift? And I think the way, or one way, is going back to the issue of education. The reason why American university professors, by default, when they make some discovery, they immediately think of the application in the company they're going to start, to simplify, is not perhaps more than due to the fact that when they were children, when they grew up, they were put in that mindset. There's the old story of every American child goes sell lemonade in the summer. It's just one image, but it is true that in the Anglo-Saxon world, this is built into the mentality of everyone, including those special beings, university professors. They are entrepreneurial in their subconscious, perhaps, and so when they take a step in their research, for example, they immediately think of that dimension. It doesn't mean they will be entrepreneurs, but they're more prepared to get into the entrepreneurial mindset and endeavor. So I do think education is a very big factor. More specifically, what universities can do, there's a bunch of, entrepreneurs should put forward solutions, not just talk about what the problem is. So I think that some of the solutions include, and this may be too obvious, but they include funding. And this is not just really about the universities, it's about the funding of research. One problem, for example, in the life sciences, where I come from, and any area where research, sort of hardcore research, can give rise to revolutionary products. What happens in Portugal versus countries that are more advanced is that academicians, or university professors, researchers, they are tending to start companies too early, because at one point in their research, it's very hard to get funding within the university to take that idea forward. And it actually has become relatively easy to start a company, maybe not to grow a company, but to start a company. So many do that before it's time, when, for example, in the United States, with an SBI or with an NIH grant, you take a number of steps so that when you form the company, you are much more prepared to attract funding, going back to your previous question, than the typical Portuguese science-based entrepreneur is today. So one of the things that has to change at the level of university research, although it may not depend only on the universities, is to think of funding pre-company, pre-business, that allows businesses to grow or to be born stronger. Then there are other things, I won't take too much longer, but bring the universities, the startups and the entrepreneurs to the campus and allow professors, like many countries do, for example, allow professors to actually have paid interactions with companies that are paid by their university salary, because it's part of what they're doing. It's seen as part of what they're doing. You know, 1 day a week do consulting for startups. This is done in some of the Nordic countries at least. One piece of sort of advice I would give to whoever's thinking about this is, do not see technology transfer and the formation of spin-outs out of universities as you know, a way for big profits, a way for universities to fund themselves. It may be, but that's not how you should do it, because the likelihood is that at least for a few years, while you're doing it very seriously, it won't really change directly the magnitude of the funding that a university has, just because they have, you know, a share of a IP of some company. The most important effect, and you know, check Stanford, check MIT, the most important effect is the spillover effects that having those companies, having those university professors starting new projects, interacting with the industry, will have over the university's own capacity to attract very good students, attract very good faculty, international and so forth, and of course then to generate business around them, generate an ecosystem. That's much more important than, you know, betting on the, you know, the one technology that will generate tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. You should not think of that as the target. The target is to create spillover effects in an ecosystem around the university, because you have an industry, an emergent industry around campus.
Thank you, Noon. So we are about to finish. Just a quick close remark. Just would like to say that became quite clear in the end that we should obviously learn from the best practices of Israel in the book, because they are leading this innovation ecosystem, but we also should focus on our specificities as a country, taking advantage of our competitive advantages that we have in order to differentiate ourselves also from other countries, and obviously become more agile, lower the barriers, increase the connectivity, and in the end, the networking effect between people in other ecosystems. But I believe we are doing our path, we are on the right path, maybe like a bit behind, but we are learning from the best, and of course, we will continue to strive in this startup scene. So thank you all, thank you, Saul, for being connected with us online. Thank you. Thank you all for being present.
Thank you very much for the great debate.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Let me start by greeting the rector of the Nova University, obviously Mr. Ambassador from Israel, the president of CCDR, as well as the participants in this very, very interesting panel. And in particular, I would like to greet Saul Singer as the co-author of this very, very interesting book that somehow revealed the recipe for the success story of Israel in a particular area in which obviously Portugal is truly committed in order to become a startup nation. It's obviously an inspiration to us, to Portugal, but also a very significant reference for someone who is looking and truly committed to change our business model as a country. It's interesting to see, they were already highlighted the similarities between Portugal and Israel, and they are also very clearly stated in this book. And we're talking mainly about the size and scale. It's true that we both share a medium-sized territory and similar population, 9 million compared to 10 million in Portugal. So we will never become a very big market. So the only option we can look into is basically look into the internationalization of our economy, look to other countries and establish bridges and open our economies to the outside world. And also, it's also very interesting to see the idea of getting special, on focus on specific activities or sectors that I believe it's part of the success explanation of the Israeli experience. We don't share the same geopolitical challenges that Israel needs to face, but we have others. I need to emphasize the war on talent, the difficulties we still have, because we have a legacy. When we recall where we were on 1974, when we had 25% of our population that didn't know how to read. In fact, we are talking about the Portuguese miracle. We have now only 5% of those people that don't know how to read. And also at the same time, in 2020, we reached our highest record in terms of population in universities, which is more than all of our student population, which represents a true miracle for someone who was lagging behind. It's also interesting to get another, or to emphasize another learning, which is this tolerance to failure. I think it's true that in Portugal we still need to work on this. There is room for improvement. We immediately tend to criticize when something goes wrong or doesn't go exactly according to the planning, and it is something that compares not so well when we look into the Silicon Valley or the Israel example. It seems that they are dealing much better with these failures and with error. And it's also interesting to understand that it's exactly because of this need to test and to experiment, because it's where the knowledge is born, where the learnings can get extracted, that we decided to launch this initiative of free zones for technology that are basically regulatory sandboxes that are aimed to stimulate testing, to stimulate piloting and experimentation. It's already approved legally, the legal framework. We need now the ecosystems to explore this and to start testing and creating these free zones for technology. It's also true that Israel has been very efficient in capturing talent to their own countries. Obviously, it's something that we have been also quite successful, I must say. We were historically, like Nuno said, we were historically a country of immigrants that left our country. We allowed the best ones to leave in some cases and in some parts of our history. But we also see the opposite. We see a trend of people, some coming back. We see immigrants, highly skilled people coming back to our country and supporting us in these new areas. It's also interesting to note the fact that I believe the Israeli economy and society was very clear in identifying areas of speciality. They basically don't go for everything. There's not a generalist approach. It's very clear the areas of focus. Obviously, the military area is one of them, the cybersecurity, but also an area like the healthcare area in which they have been quite successful, and we saw the example during this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. But it's also an area in which Portugal also responded quite well. In fact, when compared to the average of the European Union, we can conclude that Portugal performed quite well, and our startups were able to deliver very interesting projects and services. And another thing that I believe also is an interesting parallel between our two countries is the cultural richness. It's true that sometimes we tend to not give the right value to this important asset. Countries with long histories, with a very diverse culture, and they are typically much more competitive, much more interesting from a cultural perspective. but specifically from economic perspective, they are much more competitive because they tend to attract different angles to stimulate innovation and to be more tolerant to diversity. So there is this apparent contradiction between old countries or very old cultures and the startups and the new world. In fact, they can be compatible, and Israel, although it's a recent country with 70 years, has a very long history behind, and so it's all that set that contributes to that richness and capacity to deliver. So I believe this book is obviously a very strong inspiration for both the Portuguese entrepreneurs and the investors, but also to the Portuguese politicians. We definitely need to learn from this recipe, but I also agree with Nuno in the sense that we need to find our own way. We don't need to follow exactly. We are not Silicon Valley. We are not Israel. We have our own specific context, but it's true that we definitely can learn from the best practices that they shared with us. Another interesting thing is the impact that the military aspect and the military service has on the Israeli society. In fact, it like it was also mentioned, it somehow injects in the global economy and society some sense of discipline, of resilience, of capacity to resist to adversity, and somehow it creates this also apparent contradiction. Somehow it creates the capacity for individual resilience, but at the same time a sense of collective community that also we have also, I believe, in Portugal, some room for improvement also in this area. We need to be more prone to collaborate with each other, less concerned with our own farms, and being able, and this also resonates with what was just the conclusion of this panel, which is we need to bring, for example, companies into the universities. We need to bring our academic people into the companies. And in fact, what we see, and these 2 years in this role has been quite a learning in this area, there is still some resistance. We still look into each other as the other side of the barrier, and it doesn't make sense, and the good examples show that that is not the way. It's also interesting to emphasize or to highlight this conclusion or this quote from Shimon Peres, which is the importance of daring, of being able to be ambitious and to be bold. And that was why we decided to make a benchmark when we were preparing the Portuguese presidency of the European Council. We looked into other countries and specifically into the Israeli example to understand what was the explanation behind the less performance that Europe has when compared, for example, with USA, with Israel, or with Singapore. In fact, we have specific learnings. We, for example, we are importing the good example of the platform that you are using to monitor your startup's ecosystem, the Startup Central. It's probably the best platform we have in the world to monitor this ecosystem, and we are replicating this great example. And it's also obvious that Europe is facing a challenge regarding or concerning the excessive fragmentation of our market. In fact, we still don't have a single digital market for Europe, and this means that whenever a startup wants to grow, wants to become international, it needs to deal with 27 different regulatory systems and 27 different economies. And that is why probably the explanation for so many startups are draining constantly to the US market, enlarging the figures of the US economy instead of becoming and staying behind in Europe and helping us to grow. And that was also why we decided to promote a convergence between the 27 member states and sign a common framework and declaration for Europe Startup Nation standards that are supposed to create what are the requirements for a startup nation. In fact, the motto of this book is exactly the kind of reflection we'd made as a whole, the 27 representatives from the 27 member states, in order to understand what should be the requirements to become a truly startup nation. And we are talking about stock options, the fiscal aspect, but also things like how to retain our talent, how to have regulatory policies that really support this ecosystem, things like being able to attract other companies from other countries to also come to Europe. So it's really important to have this convergence, and I believe there is a political sign very strong on this. Also, I'd like to emphasize another thing that is connected with this dreaming and ambition, which is the attracting to Portugal, and it was already formally announced, of this Europe Startup Nations Alliance, this new permanent structure for the European Union that will have the head office in Lisbon, and together with the Web Summit will be extremely relevant for us to be more relevant in terms of the European startups ecosystem. Another thing that I believe we should also emphasize as contributions to this stronger relationship between the academics and the companies, it's the digital innovation hubs and the test beds. Part of it was already mentioned by Jorge Portugal on his intervention. In fact, we are definitely working with the private sector. We do believe that any successful approach on these topics requires a very strong collaboration. We need to co-design these measures. We don't decree ourselves a startup nation or a nation that somehow was a miracle. We need to work together with someone that is on the field, being able to know what are the bottlenecks and what are the recipe to overcome those difficulties. Another thing that I would like to emphasize is, and I'm almost finishing, is that in fact, and as I started, in fact, we should learn from this economic miracle from Israel. It was not just a miracle. In fact, it is the result of a very, very strong labor force and intention and continuity, consistency of policies, which is also something that we also believe it has been successful in Portugal, and that is why we are, although not being one of the biggest countries, we have been able to be relevant in this ecosystem. Also would like to emphasize the need for planning. We are not very internationally well perceived as a country that truly invests in planning. But in fact, in our case, in the digital transition area, we decided that we definitely needed an action plan. In fact, we approved it 1 and 3 months ago. And it was very relevant when we needed to face a pandemic crisis. In fact, we had somehow a recipe to address the kind of challenges. And our recipe is relatively simple. We wanted to bet on skills, on talent, on people. Starting with a lifelong learning approach, with Escola Digital, with a very strong investment in terms of reskilling and upskilling, and also on digital inclusion, but also, of course, a very strong investment in our startups ecosystem. We have already a very strong ecosystem. We are talking about more than 2,500 startups, of more than 1% of our GDP. We're talking about more than 25,000 jobs, and like I already mentioned, we have already 4 unicorns, which compares very well with the average on the European Union. But of course, we want to be more than the Web Summit country, and it was very good to see that our startup ecosystem performed really well during the pandemic crisis. What we saw is that basically this ecosystem was in counter-cycle. Obviously, they have to face some difficulties, but it was true that the fact that they have more differentiated human resources and business models that incorporate more technology makes this ecosystem much more resilient to crises like the ones that we are facing. So if I need to summarize my contribution to this discussion on one word, definitely knowledge is the right word. Knowledge, talent, this is the key for success. It has always been like that. 500 years ago, when we were able to succeed in the first globalization, in fact, knowledge was also the recipe for success. So I do believe that we need to focus and bet on that. And we need this startup culture that, like mentioned, we need agility, we need speed, we need innovation, and a strong bet on knowledge. So my contribution is basically to encourage you to open yourselves, the university itself, open yourself. I know you're doing a terrific job on that, but we need even more. Nova is probably one of our best examples in terms of universities that is open to the private sector. We need more of that, and we need also to benefit from the discussions that will happen starting tomorrow on these innovation discussions and debate that we need to promote. Thank you very much to everyone, and congratulations for this initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State. May I thank you all for your participation in this session. I hope you have enjoyed the program. We look forward to see you tomorrow.